Hello, everybody. Just want to get a mic test. Sylvia, can you hear me?
You sound good. Yes, thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. If this is your first time checking out a cloud security masterclass, welcome. We're glad to have you. And if you're a returning attendee, welcome back. Glad to see you again. Before I go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Josh Stella, who's going to dig into pen testing your cloud, just a few public service announcements. First up, as we all probably know, AWS reInvent is underway. If you're registered over there, definitely stop by the Fugue virtual booth. We have a bunch of videos and other materials, resources about Fugue and cloud security. And we are also giving away a number of Amazon gift cards for $250. So head on over there. I think Sylvia just posted a link in the chat for our page and get yourself registered. Also, we have now a really growing library of on-demand cloud security masterclass sessions. These include deep dives into Amazon S3, IAM, Thinking Like a Hacker, serverless security, as well as some really awesome, fun conversations. Most recently, we had Corey Quinn on called Screaming at Security. That was a ton of fun and I think pretty insightful too. So go ahead and check those out, fugue.co/masterclass. And we also have available the Engineer's Handbook on Cloud Security. This is a resource chock full of actionable information for you to think more critically about how to go about securing your unique cloud use cases. That is at fugue.co/handbook. All right, so let's get on with this. The chat is now open. Want to encourage everybody to pop any comments, questions that you have at any point during this session into chat. Make sure you check all participants and not just panelists. But if you want to remain anonymous, you're free to just pose questions directly to us. But we do want to make this more interactive. It's a lot more fun that way. So with that, let's get on with it. Hey, Josh, how you doing?
Hey, Drew, I'm doing well. Are you hearing me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Excellent. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Security Masterclass. This is going to be a fun one. It's going to be a little freeform because a lot's been going on the internet these days around pen testing and red teaming. And I'm going to try to relate that back to what you need to be concerned about in cloud. Okay. But before we get going, I would love a show of hands for, I recognize some familiar names for folks who have done these before. I just want to get a ratio of folks who have attended our master classes to new folks. All right, we've got definitely some repeats and we've definitely got some new folks. So for the repeat folks, I might be a little repetitive on some things to set the stage. I won't be boring about it, but I hope. But we're going to cover a little bit of fundamental ground. Okay, repeat, and HK says he or she is new. And by the way, we like these to be really interactive. You know, if you want to throw something in the chat that you want me to cover, you know, I'll do that. Just let's take the conversation together and make it a real class. So I want to talk a little about the purpose of these classes. It is not feasible for me to share everything I know about a given topic in an hour. In addition to that, I don't know everything about any given topic. So what we're trying to do here is get you thinking in a productive way about a problem space. So in other words, for you to gain some mastery by learning how to process information and how to approach a topic. Because the topics, we're talking about cloud here, we're talking about cloud security, they're constantly changing. And so the most important thing is for you to learn how to, at least what we think we can share with you, you know, our best knowledge about how to address these topics. So today that's going to be pen testing. We've got a brief agenda. I'm going to set the table on cloud security and pen testing a little bit. And then we're going to dig in, and there's not a lot of slides. If you haven't done our master classes before, this is mostly just live, and this one's going to be a lot of web browsing and whiteboarding. Okay, so let's kind of get started. So one thing we like to do in these master classes is have a little bit of fun. And so the one way we do that is we put up, I put up backgrounds from kind of nerd culture, which I would define in this case as stuff I like that I think you might also like. And the first person to say what it is, these are going to be things like video games or other games, computer history, movies and anime. The first person to name it in the chat publicly is going to win some swag, because we all miss swag. We're not going to trade shows anymore. Virtual reInvent is a little, we're doing it. It's cool and everything, but it would be a lot more fun if we were sharing drinks and giving out swag. So we're going to give out swag that way. And I'm going to do my first background. We're going to do probably 4, maybe 5 of these. If I put one up that nobody guesses, we might do more. But I'm going to put up a background, and the first person to, I need to move screens. I'm going to stop sharing here. I'm going to stop sharing so I can put up my first background. Okay. I have too many monitors. I need them, but it is confusing. All right, let's do, and there's a theme this week based on an event that happened last night at many of us at midnight. Oh, man, Bill's on it. Yeah, this is a shot from Johnny Mnemonic, which is a 90s, I think, interpretation of a William Gibson story. An awesome story, a pretty campy movie, but it wasn't Matrix. A couple people guessed Matrix. Yes. All right, we got a winner. So one other thing that you may have noticed that's different is on that opening slide, in prior master classes, it said co-founder and CTO, and now it says co-founder and CEO. So I have been asked by the board to take on the CEO function here at Fugue, which I'm super excited about. A number of people have asked me who became aware of this. We just announced it on Monday. Am I going to keep doing master classes? Yes, I am. And I will do my best to not get dumber as CEO. I can't claim to have ever been smart, but I'll do my best to not get dumber. Okay, let's go back to some screen sharing. And by the way, thank you, Tristan, for the congratulations. I'm very pleased. If you win one, don't guess anymore. Don't even guess to the panelists, because that's kind of confusing. The reason is you can only win one background per session. And we want to make sure that we, keep it fair. And if you and I are like rolling on a vibe and you're getting more than one, if you guess it, that ruins it for other people. Okay, but the next master class will do more. I'm getting a lot of congrats. Thank you. All right, so let's really drill in now. Cloud misconfiguration is both the #1 attack surface in the cloud and often a big penetration testing gap. Penetration testing historically has been much more oriented around CVEs at the operating system and application level. And we're going to drill into that a little more with some of the news events from the last week. So a lot of pen testers aren't yet savvy to this. We've had a mixed bag. We do a lot of our own internal pen testing because outside resources sometimes don't really understand the attack vectors. And a lot of these misconfiguration vectors are missed because the compliance families that people are focused. So one, there's really no practical list of CVEs that will help you. And two, the compliance families often miss, like, NIST or CIS benchmark or HIPAA or whatever, often miss the attack vectors that the bad guys are really using. And so what that means is a lot of the automated testing tools like Kali Linux and there's many just aren't focused on this, and teams don't know what to focus on. All right, we've got compliance is not necessarily security. That's right. They're kind of two sides of a coin, or the Venn diagram overlaps a fair amount. But to do what is pen testing, right? Pen testing is pretending to be a bad hacker by being a good hacker. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit before we go into this pen testing gap is dangerous about the difference between vulnerability testing and penetration testing. So vulnerability testing is when you use automated tools. We at Fugue build one of these for you that will tell you where you're vulnerable to known vulnerabilities. And so at Fugue, we like to do things, if you've seen earlier classes, where we are taking apart real world hacks and showing you what the bad guys are really doing. And we build that into the product, but that's still vulnerability testing. Vulnerability testing is checking against a list of known bad things. Penetration testing is different. It involves a human actor. And to do well, it involves a truly knowledgeable and nefariously minded human actor. It is full-blown hacking, but where the results are shared rather than data is stolen and sold on the dark web or something like this. So it involves that human actor, and it's really important for that human actor to understand the real world hacking vectors. And we're just not seeing a ton of evidence of that. So here at Fugue, we do a lot of this internally. All right, so the pen testing gap around misconfiguration is really dangerous because generally these things aren't covered by compliance. We taught a masterclass, I believe, I've done a presentation on the Capital One breach, which was an IAM role assumption breach combined with S3 discovery. These kinds of vulnerabilities are really just not captured in compliance families. Therefore, they're often, and not in CVEs either, for the most part, not in CVEs. CVEs are still in the pre-cloud era for the most part. They're thinking about operating systems, they're thinking about applications, not cloud configurations. And therefore, these things aren't recognized as vulnerabilities by security teams or many pen testers. They only become apparent in the full context of an environment, right? Most of the cloud breaches we see are chaining together misconfigurations, or misconfigurations in CVEs. Like maybe I get into your cloud account by breaching a public-facing compute instance that has a CVE, and I exploit that CVE. But the very next thing I'm going to do is look for cloud credentials to go attack the cloud APIs. I don't really care about that CVE. I need to understand it in the full context of that environment, because I'm probably trying to get to things like your database or your S3 storage, et cetera. Because they're not covered in these kind of Bibles of security, between CVEs and compliance frameworks, they're super easy to overlook, and that makes them very common. They are also largely exploitable without detection, and changes in your configuration on cloud are occurring outside of your pipeline constantly. So you can't trust analysis of things like Terraform and CloudFormation templates to give you much help here. You want to do those things, and we actually have tools to let you do those things, but you have to be constantly monitoring those production environments because folks go in and make changes. All right, just a little bit on the shared responsibility model. And Corey Quinn in our last masterclass had a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Ungenerous view of the shared responsibility model as a concept from the cloud providers. I won't quote him, but basically, if you really look into the shared responsibility model, what the cloud providers are saying is they're securing things like the data centers they run in, the actual, like the hypervisor level, memory allocation. So they're signing up to say that their version of the hypervisor they're running for virtual machines or for containers. AWS actually runs a hypervisor for containers, not a container management system. That you can't get shared memory access to something else, that lower level stuff. But everything else is on you. Everything else is on you. So when you're thinking about pen testing, you want to be pen testing against all the stuff that's on you, right? Because otherwise you're going to miss vectors. All right, let's dig into this some. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to do another background because what are we? 20 minutes in. I'm going to do a background. What I did last time, a movie. I'm going to change it up. All right, name this computer. I'm dating myself here. Oh man, Jay Styles just bang. I think Jay Styles must have had one. Did Jay Styles already win one? Sylvia, help me here. No, I guess not. Right,
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button. No, he did not. He's totally legit. He might have been to a previous masterclass, but
I've never used this image before.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, Jay probably has one in his house right now. I don't know.
I had a neighbor who had, this is an Atari 800, and it was a really cool, it was like a real computer for the early 80s. And you would, instead of having like a tape drive, like a TRS-80, you could actually just load cartridges, which was really cool because if you ever tried to load programs off tape drives, I mean cassette tape drives, it's obnoxiously slow. All right, so we got a winner. I'm going to go back to no background, and then we're going to dig in a little. So something big happened in the news this week that's very directly related to penetration testing. But actually, before we get into that, I want to talk a little more about what pen testing really is. So what pen testing is, and I mentioned this before, is hiring, either internally or externally, people to use all of their knowledge and all of their tooling to try to exploit your environment in a way to teach you how to limit the ability of bad guys to exploit the environment. So it is by nature kind of defined by the parameters of the knowledge of the practitioner. It is an art, not a science. There's a little science, but it's mostly an art. It's more like a trade. Like knowing the tricks of the trade is highly appropriate in pen testing. I'll give you this caveat. I'm not a pen tester. I'm somebody who hires pen testers, and I'm a programmer and a software architect who's been primarily focused on security for, about 15 years, doing national security stuff. And when I was at AWS as a principal solutions architect for DoD and folks like that. But pen testers are a unique breed. They are folks who could be bad guys. Well, good pen testers could be bad guys, but have chosen to put on a white or gray hat and sell their services to companies to kind of be like the canary in coal mine sort of hackers. All right, so the primary purpose of pen testing is to really probe at your weak points. Yeah, I look great for 105. Yes. I'm not going to comment on that. Yeah, ghosts of computers past. Indeed. I like old computers. My wife made me get rid of a big pile of them a few years ago, but I do like old computers. So back to pen testing and vulnerability testing. Vulnerability testing can be automated. Pen testing requires a hacker, a white hat, gray hat hacker. The term hacker originally meant a clever programmer. And that's what you want in your pen tester, somebody who is nefarious and knowledgeable and very, very clever. You can do this in-house, you can do this out of house. What we're really talking about when we're doing pen testing in this discussion is primarily focused on the red team side. So the term red team comes from military exercises where we have had for a long time simulations enemy tactics in real war games, like flying real jets over the desert in Nevada kind of stuff, where there's a red team who represents the enemy to give the blue team who represents your side experience dealing with a simulated enemy in real time and not just running simulations in the sense of automated simulation. So that's how to think about pen testing. There's this concept of like purple team. You know, you can like the concept or not. I'm not going to comment on it. It's not that relevant to this conversation. But the red team is the queen of the battlefield when it comes to cloud security. The blue team doesn't have much opportunity to defend against the red team. All right, so we're going to focus more on that red team side. And interestingly, we quite recently had a major news event. I'm going to share my screen, where one of the best, hey, Sylvia Drew, are you seeing my browser? It's hard for me to tell.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Where one of the best companies in the world, FireEye, who acquired Mandiant, and Mandiant are just, you know, masters at this trade. In fact, the Mandiant CTO is on our board of advisors. But a sophisticated state actor, which there's probably a pretty short list of who that might be, broke in, I think it was announced Monday or Tuesday. It's been a bit of a blur this week, that they broke into FireEye and stole the hacking tools, the red team tools that FireEye, or at least some of them, had developed. Okay, so I was thinking, wow, my job is going to be really easy for this masterclass. Right? We announced this like a month ago, but the idea that, you know, there was this whole collection of tools out there, I'm betting I won't have to think about much or write much. I'm just going to go through, you know, what that breach was and talk about the vulnerabilities. And what I found, this is and by the way, what FireEye did is just like chef's kiss best practice, right? As soon as this happened and they knew about it, they announced it. And what did they do? They put up a GitHub repo for countermeasures to the tools that were stolen. So these are the things you want to think about that they had tools that would exploit, that are now in the hands of who knows who. And I went through this, and none of these are cloud exploits. They're all traditional CVE based, you know, pre-auth arbitrary file reading from Pulse Secure SSL VPNs, Active Directory escalation of privileges. I mean, this is like old school stuff. This is data center stuff. Now, by the way, you still need to be worried about this. But for the most part in cloud, the hackers are only using CVEs to get to your cloud credentials. Okay, so these are things you, and by the way, everyone should go to this page like today. I'll put the URL in the chat, and just make sure that you do not have these vulnerabilities anywhere in your environments, because we now know that a hostile state actor most likely has access to these and will probably be exploiting them right away, probably already is. So, but the topic of this conversation is really cloud pen testing. And I want to talk for a minute about, you know, here, I'm going to whiteboard for a sec on how I'm going to stop my share and move my share to another screen. Screen share my whiteboard here. Okay. I want to talk about how real world cloud exploits can happen. So let's say you have, you know, a compute instance, an EC2 instance. Drew, Xavier, are you getting my whiteboard?
Yep.
Cool. So let's say you have one with a CVE on it. Let's say it's one of the ones that we were just talking about. You know, let's say it's running, it's a Windows server, and there's a local privilege escalation CVE on Windows server. So the hacker over here has managed to exploit a CVE to get in to this EC2 instance. In the old days in the data center, where most segmentation of the and security, the defense in depth security was based on networks. That's not true in cloud. It's based on permissions of identities in cloud. So this EC2 instance that I've gotten into, and by the way, I don't need to root it anymore. I just need to have shell. I just need to be able to execute commands in user space. Has in AWS, you know, an IAM policy attached to it. And what I'm going to try to do as a hacker is chain together some things to get to S3 or to RDS, okay? And what I'm really looking for to do that are credentials in the identity systems in the cloud. So on AWS, it's IAM. On Azure, that's Active Directory. Google's also called IAM. And what I want are creds, okay? There are several ways to get access to those creds. One of them is exploit a CVE on a compute instance that's live and running, right? And that's what we saw with the Capital One breach. But in some of the other breaches, we had a different problem, a different vector for the attacker. And I'm going to show you something now that I would go and immediately check. I would go immediately check that link I just sent you. And then the next thing I would do is go immediately check this. Right, we're going to share screen to here. Now, this is a public website called Gray Hat Warfare. Okay, and what they do is they use automation to discover any S3 buckets and files that are exposed publicly. Now, that doesn't mean exposed to the entire internet. That doesn't mean AWS or Azure have it set as public access. It means from some IP address that these folks are operating from, right? Access was possible into that storage container. And that's kind of its own topic, but don't trust like restrict public access, block public access. That will, you should be using it, but it's not good enough. All right. This is public information. I would go, if I were you, pretty much right away today and search this to make sure you don't have anything sitting out there. I'm going to try to be very respectful of folks here and not expose any secrets, but this is public information. Does anyone know what a PEM file is? I'll watch the chat. A PEM file, P-E-M. It's a key pair. It's creds. It's key credentials, exactly. So what I'm doing here is Gray Hat Warfare. You can go here. I'll post the link here. And I'll put it in the chat. Yeah, SSH keys, exactly. SSH is often configured using PEM files as key pairs to access SSH, but it can be used for lots of other stuff too, okay? So this is what I'm gonna do here is a search for anything that contains the string PEM that are in these buckets that Gray Hat Warfare have found. So let's search. And the first thing I want to point to is we have almost 19,000 results. Okay. Now, we don't know if these are credentials that have been rotated out and are no longer valid. We don't know if they're credentials to anything that's meaningful. But we do know these are credentials that ended up in internet-facing storage containers in the cloud. And we know from several major breaches that this was the attack vector that was used by the hackers, was to go search public repositories. In this case, we're looking at S3 buckets. Another source is GitHub, right? Where folks do something accidentally, like they don't have their git ignore configured right, and you start seeing all these PEM files. All right, and there's 20,000 almost of these out there on this site. I'm gonna move through that quickly. You can go duplicate the search. I just don't want to like out anyone who isn't aware of it, but you should go find out if you're exposed in this way. The reason I bring this up is a good pen tester, a good cloud pen tester, is definitely going to know about that. Okay, because those credentials are really what they're after. So when they get those credentials, they can do all kinds of malfeasance with them, depending on the permissions and privileges given to those credentials. I want to take a little bit of a sideline because we have quite a few new folks here. And I want to talk just about the cloud security model, like how this works. Because you're probably used to thinking about networks and TCP/IP addresses and segmentation and defense in depth and things like that. The cloud is just fundamentally different. And so your pen testers need to be aware of this also. NNE? I don't know what you mean, Richard. All right, so in cloud, and Richard, if it's something you want us to comment on, let me know. And I'm not sure what you meant by that. So in the cloud, you really have, I'll use AWS as the example. Oh, no worries, man. I mistyped. I do it all the time. So you really have three kinds of major things, where in the data center you had like segmentation by networks and TCP/IP addresses. You can do that stuff in the cloud, but that's not the main attack vector. The main attack vector are these permissions, and these permissions and policies are related to three major categories. The first one are called principals in AWS. And that might be, Bill, or it might be a process. Peter says, we can't see questions, so maybe read them before trying to answer. We got a comment that was just the letters NNE from someone, and then he said it was a mistype, and I thought maybe I was just ignorant of an acronym. So, yes.
And one thing to keep in mind when you ask a question, please make sure you check off and all attendees and panelists. Otherwise, nobody else will be able to see those questions.
Yeah, good point. These are more fun when they're just, everyone's talking to everyone. All right, but it may also be like a process, a principle. It may be, that EC2 instance, for example, that had the CVE. So the next thing you have are what are called actions. And those are things like, get from S3 or, create EC2 instance. These are the control plane actions of the cloud. There are also things like list S3, and with cloud databases like DynamoDB or RDS, you can have access permissions to query data via these cloud actions. In other words, not doing the kind of old school or traditional way of having specific credentials that are located in the database in the users table or what have you, but instead using these policy permissions to get access to, I'll just call it DB access. So this is the gold mine of stuff. And by the way, there are thousands of these in AWS alone. And a lot of the job of the hacker is to find cracks in access to those actions in order to get to resources. A U. And resources are things like specific databases, like MyDB as an RDS instance, or an S3 bucket called foo. So Tristram says actions are any API call, console or AWS CLI. That console, AWS CLI, or direct API interaction through an application or anything using one of the SDKs that uses those APIs. The right way to think about cloud, in my opinion, is not as a remote data center. It is as a collection of actions against resources. It's just one big computer in the sky, and you're granting these permissions typically via these. So that means, one, you can have a massive blast radius if you make a mistake, because your defense in depth is essentially gone. But two, you have one place to look to find a great many of your vulnerabilities. And if you use tooling like what we build, and if you employ red teamers to understand this stuff, they can point these out to you. So just briefly, the default policy in the cloud is typically deny access of all principals to all actions, and of all principles and actions to all resources. You have to open gaps. That's what the bad guys are looking for, not that CVE. The CVE, you know, they're going to enjoy that if they can get to a compute instance that has credentials that allow them that API-based access deeper into the cloud. All right, we're at 40 minutes. Or 38 minutes. I'm going to do another background. And please, if you have questions or things you want me to talk about, just go ahead and throw them in the chat. What could we do? You want like an anime, a video game, or a computer out of history? First person to give me one of those categories. Video game. All right, video game it is. All right. Here's a recent game. It's not Grand Theft Auto. So I asked, how many more master classes can we expect? I don't plan on stopping anytime. So would be interested, Doug says, would be interested to see an example, please, of AWS chained role access, like elevating access. It's not Cyberpunk 2077. Andrew got it. Andrew got it. Although I, like many folks who are dedicated geeks, was up for a little bit at midnight last night playing a little bit of Cyberpunk. I got a character built. That's about it. Oops. Let me get rid of my background. I didn't mean to turn off my video, but yes, that is Yakuza. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hear Yakuza and Yakuza. But yes, Andrew got it. Super cool game. Great sense of humor. Great Japanese role-playing game. A lot of fun. All right. So back for a second to well, we had a good. I lost my chat switching back and forth.
Is that the elevated access, the AWS chained role access?
Yeah. So there's a good example of that. I'll just speak to this, and we show this in the one of the sessions we did on real world hacks. So an example of this might be, well, I'll whiteboard. An example of this might be. Screen again. All right, I'm going to erase this. An example of this might be something like the Capital One breach. All right, so when we're analyzing breaches, if you've been to these before, there are a few that I tend to refer to most, and it's because we have the most public information about them. But what Doug is talking about, I think, and Doug, tell me if I'm wrong, is essentially using the IAM privileges as sort of a network, doing lateral movement to get the stuff you might have access to. So Doug, tell me if I'm on track there. Okay, yes, cool. So so that particular breach did involve a misconfigured compute instance. A lot of folks thought that the exploit was it was a web application firewall that had a misconfiguration that allowed an attacker to get access to shell on that box. A lot of folks thought they were just grabbing creds out of the metadata service and then running the breach remotely, but that's not what the DOJ filing suggests. What the DOJ filing suggests is the attacker got in to an EC2 instance. I think her name was Paige. So Paige gets in to this EC2 instance, and then she starts talking about what's called IAM assume role. So IAM is identity and access management. This is the new network. This is how you chain together those permissions through that stack of principles, actions, and resources. So what was Paige trying to do? She was trying to steal data out of S3, way over here on the resources side, right? Particular S3 buckets. And I keep leaving out my U in resources. So the fact that she had to do an IAM assume role to achieve that suggests that this EC2 instance that she first got to did not have permissions to go suck data out of S3, right? So maybe this was a set of permissions, just, app role or something. And maybe that set of permissions just allowed, I don't know, access to, you know, an application server or something, right? In the resources area. I'm going to extend my line here. But what she wanted to do is get to S3. So an IAM assume role means to take this EC2 instance or a container or a Lambda function, much harder on Lambda. EC2 instances and containers are more vulnerable to this than Lambdas. And change from this app role to like an S3 read role or something like that. So these sets of permissions become, and we do like a real-time example of this where I'm typing at the command line to show you how this actually happens. I'm just whiteboarding it today because that kind of takes like an hour. So by doing the IAM assume role, IAM assume, that changes the credentials and permissions, which allowed, in this case, the attacker to do a list operation against S3. And there were, I believe, 700 roughly S3 buckets that were discovered. And the reason we know this is the DOJ filing said she used a command called sync. And sync requires list permissions. So by the way, if you have list permissions for S3 or other similar services running in your compute in your production, you are very exposed to potential risk there. And then she used that sync command, which first requires the list capabilities and then allowed syncing out to an S3 bucket that Paige owned. So this is more typical of a cloud breach than somebody left a bucket open to world. I just showed you there's plenty of stuff to worry about in somebody left an S3 bucket open to world, but in the more sophisticated breaches, these are the kinds of attacks that are used. For example, the Uber hacks, and Uber have not been good citizens about this. They have, in fact, I think there's some criminal charges over there. They've had a couple breaches which were due to credentials in private GitHub repos being used to exploit their production environments and get customer data. So when you're thinking about your cloud and your pen testing, don't just think about like your AWS account or your Azure account. Think about your GitHub account. Think about your email accounts, because a good pen tester is going to try to socially engineer, right? And that may be what happened. I mean, it's kind of hard to get into a private GitHub repo if multi-factor authentication is turned on. Maybe they didn't have an MFA turned on. By the way, if you don't have MFA turned on everything, please do that. That makes this much harder for bad guys, for hackers. But they got credentials out of a GitHub repo. Now, a private GitHub repo, not a public one. So that means they first gained access to GitHub, to the private repo. Then from that, they got credentials to go attack a cloud environment. So you have to think of this as a kind of bigger picture. Well, thank you, Andy. Andy says, gotta go. Thanks to us. Have a nice day. Yeah, well, thanks for attending. Excuse me, I have to cough for a second. All right. Since I'm coughing, why don't we do one more background here? So then I can go and get a drink real quick and I don't have to keep talking. All right, I'll ask again, history of computing, games or movies, animes? Computers, man after my own heart. Name that computer. Is it a computer? It's kind of a computer. Oh. Yeah, Jonathan, first Jonathan said computers, and then he immediately answered what it is. I am going to take that beverage here for 1 second. Yes, typewriter. So this is the mechanical computer that inspired the first electronic computer that worked at really any scale. This is an Enigma machine, which is what the Nazis used in World War II to send encrypted messages to things like submarines. Bletchley Park, where Alan Turing worked, is an interesting team. A lot of women and Alan Turing and some other men, but more women in the history of computing than often are talked about. Developed a cryptologic machine versus, excuse me. Yes, cryptologic machine. Cryptologic and cryptographic. One is encrypting stuff, the other is decrypting stuff, and I sometimes mix them up. They developed an electronic computer in order to crack the code for this pure mechanical doohickey. Yeah, I mean, it had electrical components, but it didn't have, like, you know, vacuum tubes and so on. You set dials and then you would type in it. If you're ever in the DC area and you're into this kind of stuff, I strongly recommend going to the Cryptologic Museum, I think it's called. It's right next to the NSA campus at Fort Meade, but it's public. They have some cool stuff in there, including real enigmas that you can type on. So that's kind of fun if you're the kind of geek that I am and get excited about things like that. Okay, we have just 10 minutes left. Trying to think if we covered everything I had prepared. There's a few things that I had prepared that might be a little bit too big to go into. Anyone have any questions? Oh, one thing I meant to say at the beginning. So I co-founded this company. I've been the CTO of this company from its founding. I am also the CEO of this company. I do not have access to production. I do not want it, nor should any executives want or need or be granted access to production environments. Credentials are death in this game. And the last thing I want is for me to be an attack vector. And I would recommend that all of you think that you are personally, and every other employee in your organization are yourselves attack vectors, because you are. Good pen testers are good at this. You just simply don't want access to much of anything. All right, any other topics you want me to cover today? Drew, do we have any questions that I missed?
I don't see any that we haven't addressed. Definitely encourage anybody to, if you have any questions, pop those into chat. I do have a couple. One is just, you know, anybody out there on this call, if their organization currently has like external or even internal pen testers, you know, what are some good questions they might ask to make sure, one, that they're including cloud attack vectors in their pen testing efforts, and maybe make sure that they know what they're doing?
Yeah, and that's related to one of the questions I just saw pop up, which is I've mostly been focusing in this conversation about like credentials and identities. What are some of the other cloud areas to concern yourself with? And these are the things you should be asking your potential pen testers. You definitely should be worried about creds and identities, for sure. You should also be concerned about things like whether the pen tester understands security group permissions. So I was talking about IAM, but you also have this concept in clouds where you can chain together access privileges, not via TCP/IP based conditions, but by what's the word I'm looking for? Being within a security group. So you might have a security group called web servers, and you might have a security group called app servers. And app servers might grant ingress to anything in web servers. Well, if you think about that for a second, you realize that is something a creative hacker can exploit. So your pen testers need to understand these vectors. And there are quite a lot of them. Certainly things like bucket policies on S3 and how to exploit those in the AWS world. That's similar with blobs in Azure. So it's a very, very long list. We've built hundreds of these things into Fugue, our product, for you to check for. So it's hard for me to enumerate them all, but there's a lot of them. And this is why you're seeing a lot of these cloud exploits, is that I believe not enough folks are familiar with the real hacks and the pen testers aren't either. It's kind of beyond what I can do. It's kind of beyond what I can do in an hour. So we got a couple other questions here. Peter says, can I put that in writing so I can show my director? I'm assuming that means not having permission to things. If your director isn't open to that, I doubt I'll sway him, but I would be happy to put that in writing for you. Why are we in the basement? Well, I'm not, and actually Drew isn't either. Drew's in his garage studio, where his drum set is behind him and so on. And yes, in the era of COVID, the answer there is that's how they keep their wives calm and stay married. You're not wrong, in my case anyway. I'm actually at the Fugue office here because nobody else is. So I've camped on it. All right. Amanda asks, recommended publications, blogs, etc., to keep up with cloud security. I mean, Krebs is good for all kinds of security. Definitely do that. You know, pay attention to our YouTube channel. We do a lot of this stuff, and we're going to keep doing more. Also, our blogs. Trying to think, Drew, are you? I've had a hard time, honestly, finding really good cloud security blogs. They tend to be like single blog postings in existent blogs. The best ones are when companies get hacked and they share the information about how that hack happened and how they responded to it. Those are like the most informative and useful. A lot out there. Oh yeah, Cloud Security Alliance does have some really good blogs. Yes, they do. And we write a bunch for them too. All right, are there any tools, Robert asks, are there any tools that review the IAM policy that an EC2 instance has and then see if any of those are too wide open? Yes, we do that. We have in Fugue, we have I'm not aware of anyone else who does, they're probably out there, but we certainly do this. We have a collection of rules called Fugue Best Practices, rules meaning things we check for when we examine your cloud environments. And we add to that set of rules everything when we, a lot of times what we'll do, a big breach happens, we'll go recreate it in a sandbox, figure out how it was done, figure out what are the triggers that let you know if you're vulnerable to it. And we include those in the product. So, this is not a product pitch session of the class, but that stuff's all baked in about 10 minutes will tell you if you're vulnerable to a bunch of those. Can you please paste the YouTube URL? How do we use gray hat warfare work in cloud pen testing, asks Warwick. Okay, so the reason I brought that up is a good pen tester is going to go there. They're going to go there and they're going to see what you have that is exposed to the outside world. I, in particular, was looking for PEM files, credential files, and I found almost 20,000. Are you on that list? Worth knowing. So the pen tester, it's not so much that you're going to do something with that website to enable the pen tester. A decent pen tester knows it's out there and is going to go hit it and try to find any vulnerabilities you have.
Josh, I have a question. I don't know if you answered it, but I have a great team of engineers and DevOps folks. Why do and they know what to look for. Why do I need to hire pen testers?
Oh boy. So my background is a combination of national security and high tech. Fugue is an innovator in this space. The reason I say those things, I'm not trying to thump my own chest. I'm trying to tell you, I would never think that we're good enough ever. The hackers are clever. So what you want is somebody, and the mentality is quite different. And I like to flip back and forth. So in cloud computing, architecture is your front line of security, and most of your depth of security is architecture and design, not packet filters and stuff like that. It doesn't mean much anymore. And you certainly have to, if you have a great team, they're probably aware of many things, and they want to be employing that knowledge when creating things. However, it is a different mentality, a different skill set, and a different kind of intuition that a hacker pen tester has. They are probing to find weaknesses. And very often those weaknesses are things you simply didn't predict. And I don't care who you are. You know, I've devoted a lot of my life to this. I think it's one of those things where the more you see, the more you the more you know that you need to be concerned. So I don't mean to be insulting in any way to your team. Maybe they are the team that has captured everything, but you know, I think being highly paranoid is appropriate, because the blast radius for these exploits is just devastating. So, and hackers are super clever. Somebody said, are there any dorks like Google? I'm not sure what that means. I know I'm a dork. I don't know that I'm like Google. Richard says, one answer is not marking your own homework. Also helps insider threat considerations as well. If people aren't willing to let others look, they're the ones to look at. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think at least my understanding of what was meant there, like you should be able to expose your architecture to a pen tester, like give them the network diagrams, give them the cloud configurations, and still not let them in. That's the real test. Not can they just discover something. In the real world, that's unlikely to happen unless an insider gets flipped, which is actually very often the vector. But yes. Okay. Listen to a few episodes of Darknet Diaries podcast and you'll know, yes, you'll know why you should hire a pen testing team. Yes. So here's one way to think about pen testing teams. Do you want a report that you paid for, or do you want your boss's name in the news? Like those are kind of your choices, depending on who you are. And I know which one I prefer. Yeah, Darknet Diaries. Thank you, Tristram, for posting that. All right, we're right at the top of the hour. Heck, I'm going to do one more background. We'll close with something fun. And I'm going to do an anime. All right, this should be easy. Oh, man. Yeah, John, bang. Yeah,
Was it
Akira.
just me, or did it look like John got it almost before you even posted it? That was lightning fast.
That was lightning fast. Apparently, John is as much a fan of Akira as I am. And with Cyberpunk 2077 coming out last night, if you play that game, man, there's a ton of inspiration from Akira. If you haven't watched Akira, check it out. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm back over to you, Drew. If you have any closing, you want me to pull the deck back up?
Oh, sure. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today, as well as, you know, on this journey of the Cloud Security Masterclass series. We've been doing it now for, what, 4 months, 6 months, etc. It's been super fun. And we are really kind of starting to think about where we want to take this series next year. Definitely want to hear from you. So, you know, reach out to me. I'm Drew at fugue.co. Any feedback you have, any topics you'd like us to cover next year, we would love to hear from you. Other than that, you know, again, thank you. And we hope everybody has a great holiday season, and looking forward to 2021.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is our last one this year. You know, tell us what you want us to talk about. You know, we come up with themes we think are cool, but definitely, you know, let us know if there's topics you want us to drill into. It's kind of an infinite well of stuff we can talk about in these. So let us know. All right. Thanks,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody. See you next year.
See you next year.